In the dusty archives of the Phoenix Historical Museum, researcher David Martinez made a discovery that would chill him to the bone. He was digitizing old photographs from Arizona's territorial period when he came across a formal portrait that immediately caught his attention. The faded image showed a woman from 1881 seated stiffly in a photographer's studio. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, dressed in the modest dark wool clothing, typical of frontier life. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore a small silver brooch at her collar. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded properly in her lap, displaying the restrained expression expected in 19th century photography. But something about her eyes troubled Martinez. While her mouth held a gentle, appropriate smile, her gaze seemed to burn through the camera lens with an intensity that felt almost predatory. There was a coldness there that didn't match her refined appearance or the respectable setting of the portrait. As Martinez adjusted his scanner to capture more detail, he noticed something else that made his breath catch. There were dark stains on the woman's dress sleeves, faint marks that had survived more than 140 years of aging. Under magnification, these stains took on a disturbing appearance that looked suspiciously like dried blood. The photograph's backing bore the stamp of Williams Photography Studio, Phoenix, Arizona Territory, and a date written in faded ink, October 12, 1881. Someone had also written a name in careful script, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell. Martinez had seen thousands of frontier photographs, but none had ever made him feel so uneasy. The tedious combination of the woman's cold stare and those mysterious stains created an atmosphere of menace that seemed to reach across the centuries. He knew he had stumbled upon something significant. The question was, what dark secret was Eleanor Hartwell hiding behind that gentle smile? Martinez couldn't shake his unease about the photograph. The next morning, he contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, a historian specializing in frontier crime and justice. When he showed her the digitized image, her reaction was immediate and telling. "Those aren't dress stains," Dr. Chen said, studying the photograph intently. "Look at the pattern. These appear to be blood spatters. See how they're concentrated on the sleeves and bodice? That's consistent with someone who was present during a violent act." The two researchers began investigating Eleanor Hartwell's identity using territorial records and newspaper archives. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture of a woman who had hidden her true nature behind the respectable facade of frontier society. Eleanor had arrived in Phoenix in early 1881, claiming to be a widow from back east seeking a fresh start in the territory. She quickly established herself as a pillar of the small community, organizing charitable events and offering assistance to newly arrived women who were struggling to adapt to frontier life. The Phoenix Herald had written glowingly about Eleanor's work. "Mrs. Hartwell has shown Christian kindness to many unfortunate women, providing them with shelter and employment opportunities. Her generous spirit exemplifies the finest qualities of frontier womanhood." However, Martinez and Dr. Chen began noticing troubling patterns in the newspaper's missing persons reports from 1881. Between March and October of that year, 7 women had vanished without explanation. All had been described as transients, or women of uncertain reputation, people whose disappearances attracted little official attention. More disturbing was the common thread connecting these disappearances. Each woman had last been seen in the company of a refined lady who had offered them assistance. The descriptions of this helpful stranger matched Eleanor Hartwell perfectly. She targeted the most vulnerable women, Dr. Chen observed. Newcomers with no local connections, women fleeing difficult circumstances, anyone who wouldn't be missed immediately if they disappeared. The investigation was about to reveal something even more shocking about Eleanor's true nature. Dr. Chen's research into territorial martial records revealed a horrifying pattern that had been overlooked by 19th century investigators. The 7 missing women hadn't simply vanished. They had been systematically hunted by someone who understood exactly how to select victims who wouldn't be missed. The first victim had been Sarah Mills, a young woman from Missouri who had come west after her family died in a cholera outbreak. She was last seen accepting an offer of domestic work from a well-dressed woman who claimed to represent a prominent Phoenix family. Next was Carmen Rodriguez, a Mexican woman seeking refuge from an abusive husband. Witnesses remembered seeing her talking with an elegant American woman who promised to help her find safe employment and housing. The pattern continued through 5 more victims. All were isolated women. All had been approached by the same mysterious benefactor, and all had vanished completely. What made the crimes particularly sinister was how Eleanor had exploited these women's desperate circumstances to gain their trust. Martinez discovered that Eleanor had been remarkably methodical in her approach. She would spend weeks observing potential victims, learning about their backgrounds and vulnerabilities before making contact. She presented herself as a Christian woman motivated by charitable impulses, making her offers of assistance seem both credible and morally admirable. She was a perfect predator, Dr. Chen noted. She identified women who were already running from something, abuse, poverty, family problems, and offered them exactly what they needed most, hope. The researchers also found evidence that Eleanor had been disposing of her victims in the harsh Sonoran desert surrounding Phoenix. In 1882, flash floods had exposed human remains in a remote canyon, but territorial officials had attributed the deaths to Apache raids or natural disasters. Contemporary accounts described the discovery of personal belongings, jewelry, clothing, letters that belonged to several of the missing women. However, these clues had never been properly investigated, allowing Eleanor to continue her killing spree undetected. The October 1881 photograph now took on a chilling significance. It had been taken just days after Eleanor's 7th and final victim had disappeared. The photograph that had started Martinez's investigation marked the end of Eleanor Hartwell's killing spree, but not for reasons anyone might have expected. Her final victim, a young teacher named Mary Sullivan, would inadvertently expose Eleanor's crimes through her own desperate attempt to survive. Mary had arrived in Phoenix in September 1881, seeking work after losing her teaching position in Colorado. She was exactly the type of vulnerable woman Eleanor preferred, alone, desperate, and unlikely to be missed quickly. Eleanor approached Mary with her usual offer of employment and assistance. However, Mary was more educated and cautious than Eleanor's previous victims. Before accepting Eleanor's offer, she wrote detailed letters to her sister in Denver, describing her benefactor and the unusual urgency with which Eleanor insisted she begin work immediately. "The lady seems kind, but there is something in her manner that troubles me," Mary had written. "She asks many questions about whether anyone knows of my whereabouts, and she insists I must come with her today without delay." Dr. Chen discovered these letters in the Colorado State Archives, where they had been preserved among family papers donated decades later. Mary's detailed descriptions of Eleanor, including her clothing and manner of speech, provided the first contemporary account of the killer's methods and personality. More importantly, Mary had arranged a safety measure that Eleanor hadn't anticipated. She had told the hotel clerk that if she didn't return within 2 days, he should contact the territorial marshal. This simple precaution would prove to be Eleanor's downfall. When Mary failed to return, the hotel clerk alerted Marshal William Thompson, who began the first serious investigation into the disappearances. Thompson was the experienced lawman who had served in Kansas before coming to Arizona, and he immediately recognized the patterns that his predecessors had missed. The marshal's investigation led him to Eleanor just as she was preparing to dispose of Mary's body in her usual manner. The confrontation in the desert would finally bring Eleanor's crimes to light and reveal the true extent of her murderous activities. Marshal Thompson's investigation of Mary Sullivan's disappearance led him to Eleanor Hartwell's modest house on the outskirts of Phoenix. What he discovered there would shock even a lawman who had seen the worst of frontier violence. The house appeared respectable from the outside, but the interior told a different story. In the cellar, Thompson found evidence of torture and murder, blood-stained clothing, personal effects from the missing women, and tools that could only have been used for dismembering bodies. More horrifying was Eleanor's meticulous record-keeping. She had maintained a detailed journal documenting each murder, describing her victims' final moments with clinical detachment and disturbing satisfaction. "Sarah Mills begged prettily before the end," read one typical entry. She promised to tell no one if I released her. They all make the same promises. They all lie. The journal revealed that Eleanor had been luring victims to her home under the pretense of providing them with temporary shelter. Once isolated, she would reveal her true nature, subjecting her victims to prolonged torture before killing them. Thompson's investigation also uncovered Eleanor's method for disposing of bodies. She had been transporting remains to various locations in the Sonoran Desert, using her knowledge of flash flood patterns to scatter evidence across a wide area. When Thompson arrived at Eleanor's house to arrest her, he found her in the process of loading Mary Sullivan's body into a cart for disposal. The confrontation that followed would become legendary in Arizona territorial history. Eleanor showed no remorse when caught. Instead, she seemed almost relieved that her secret was finally exposed. "You cannot understand the burden I have carried," she told Thompson. "These women were lost souls who would have died anyway. I simply hastened their inevitable fate." The marshal's report described Eleanor as showing complete indifference to her victims' suffering. She spoke about the murders as if they were acts of mercy, claiming she had freed the women from lives of poverty and desperation. Her arrest on October 15, 1881, just 3 days after posing for her portrait, ended one of the most brutal killing sprees in territorial history. Eleanor Hartwell's trial in the spring of 1882 became a sensation that drew newspaper coverage from across the American West. The case represented something unprecedented in frontier justice. A serial killer who had hidden her crimes behind a facade of Christian charity and feminine respectability. Dr. Chen discovered extensive newspaper coverage of the trial in archives throughout Arizona and neighboring territories. The Phoenix Herald, which had previously praised Eleanor's charitable work, now struggled to reconcile her public image with the horrific evidence presented in court. How could a woman who appeared so refined and godly commit acts of such savage brutality? The newspaper's editor wrote. Mrs. Hartwell's case forces us to confront the unsettling truth that evil can wear the most innocent disguises. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Eleanor's guilt. In addition to the physical evidence found in her home, they called witnesses who had seen her with several of the victims shortly before their disappearances. Most damaging was the testimony of Mary Sullivan herself. Miraculously, Mary had survived Eleanor's initial attack and could describe in detail the methods Eleanor used to subdue her victims. Her account of Eleanor's behavior during the torture was particularly chilling. "She spoke to me as if she were a teacher instructing a student," Mary testified. "She explained that pain was necessary for purification and that I should be grateful for the opportunity to suffer before dying. She seemed to believe she was performing some kind of religious service." Eleanor's defense attorney argued that his client was mentally ill, suffering from delusions that made her believe she was helping her victims. However, Eleanor's own testimony contradicted this strategy. She spoke clearly and rationally about her crimes, showing no signs of mental impairment. "I regret nothing," Eleanor declared from the witness stand. "These women came to me seeking salvation, and I provided it. Death is the only true escape from the suffering of this world." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all 7 counts of murder. Judge Harrison ruled that Eleanor would hang, making her one of the few women executed in territorial Arizona. Eleanor Hartwell was executed on June 15, 1882, drawing crowds from throughout the territory who came to witness the hanging of Arizona's most notorious female killer. Contemporary accounts described her final moments as consistent with her behavior throughout the trial, showing no remorse and maintaining her twisted justification for the murders. Martinez found detailed coverage of the execution in multiple newspaper archives. The Phoenix Herald reported that Eleanor had spent her final night writing letters, not to apologize for her crimes, but to defend them as necessary acts of mercy. "I go to my death knowing I freed 7 souls from earthly suffering," she wrote in her final statement. "History will vindicate my actions when the world understands that death is preferable to the poverty and desperation these women faced." Even on the gallows, Eleanor maintained her composure and her delusions. When asked if she had any final words, she reportedly said, "I forgive you for not understanding my mission. Perhaps in time, society will recognize the service I provided." The execution marked the end of one of the most disturbing criminal cases in territorial history, but Eleanor's impact on Arizona continued long after her death. The case highlighted the vulnerability of women on the frontier and the ease with which predators could exploit social expectations of feminine virtue. Dr. Chen noted that Eleanor's crimes had a lasting effect on how frontier communities viewed charitable activities. After the Hartwell case, people became much more suspicious of anyone offering help to vulnerable women. The assumption of innocence based on gender and social standing was permanently damaged. The case also influenced law enforcement practices throughout the West. Marshall Thompson's investigation methods became a model for handling similar cases, emphasizing the importance of taking missing persons reports seriously regardless of the victim's social status. Most importantly, the Eleanor Hartwell case demonstrated that serial murder was not limited to male perpetrators or urban environments. Her use of supposed charitable motives to gain victims' trust established a pattern that would be recognized in similar cases for decades to come. The photograph that had captured Martinez's attention now held a different meaning entirely. It was the portrait of a killer posing proudly just days after her final murder. Martinez and Dr. Chen's research revealed that Eleanor Hartwell's case had been deliberately minimized in historical records, partly due to the discomfort frontier society felt about a female serial killer. Many documents related to her crimes had been quietly archived or destroyed, contributing to her near disappearance from Arizona's historical memory. The researchers discovered that several prominent Phoenix families had requested that references to Eleanor be removed from official records. Her association with charitable organizations had embarrassed community leaders who had initially supported her work. There was a systematic effort to erase Eleanor Hartwell from history, Dr. Chen observed. People wanted to forget that they had been deceived by her and that their own charitable organizations had provided cover for her crimes. This historical amnesia explained why Eleanor's photograph had remained unidentified in museum archives for so long. Without the context of her crimes, she appeared to be just another frontier woman whose story had been lost to time. Martinez found evidence that Williams' photography studio had originally labeled the portrait with Eleanor's real name and the date of the session. However, someone had later removed these identifications, leaving only the false name, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, that Eleanor had used during her time in Phoenix. The researchers also discovered that Eleanor's true identity had never been established. Investigation into her background revealed that Eleanor Hartwell was itself an assumed name, and that her origins remained mysterious even at the time of her execution. Letters found in territorial archives suggested that Eleanor may have committed similar crimes in other locations before arriving in Phoenix. References to unfortunate incidents in Colorado and New Mexico indicated that Arizona may not have been the beginning of her killing spree. She was probably a serial killer long before she reached Arizona, Martinez concluded. Phoenix was just where she was finally caught. This discovery raised disturbing questions about how many other victims Eleanor might have claimed, and whether her 7 confirmed murders in Arizona represented only a fraction of her total crimes. The photograph, with its evidence of bloodstains and Eleanor's cold, satisfied expression, now served as a chilling reminder of how easily evil could hide behind respectability. Martinez and Dr. Chen's research attracted the attention of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, which specializes in studying historical serial killers to understand criminal patterns. Agent Rebecca Torres reviewed their findings and concluded that Eleanor Hartwell fit the profile of an organized serial killer who had operated decades before such behavior was formally recognized by law enforcement. Eleanor Hartwell was remarkably sophisticated in her methods, Agent Torres noted. She understood victim selection, evidence disposal, and the importance of maintaining a credible public persona. These are characteristics we associate with modern serial killers, but she was using them in 1881. The FBI analysis confirmed that Eleanor's pattern of targeting vulnerable women and using charitable pretenses matched similar cases from the late 19th century. The agent suggested that Eleanor might represent an early example of what criminologists now call angel of death killers, individuals who use positions of trust and authority to access victims. Modern forensic examination of the 1881 photograph Using advanced digital enhancement techniques revealed additional disturbing details that had been invisible to earlier investigators. The bloodstains on Eleanor's dress were more extensive than initially apparent, and her expression showed subtle signs of satisfaction that became clear only under magnification. The photograph captures her immediately after a kill, Agent Torres concluded. The timing, the bloodstains, and her expression all indicate that she posed for this portrait while still experiencing the psychological high associated with her crimes. The FBI analysis also suggested that Eleanor's journal entries and behavior during her trial indicated she was suffering from what modern psychology would recognize as psychopathy. Her complete lack of empathy, her grandiose self-perception, and her inability to accept responsibility for her actions matched classic psychopathic patterns. This modern perspective on Eleanor's crimes provided new insights into her motivations and methods. Rather than being driven by desperation or mental illness, she appeared to be a calculating predator who derived pleasure from manipulating and killing vulnerable women. The research project culminated in a comprehensive report that restored Eleanor Hartwell to her proper place in Arizona's criminal history, ensuring that her victims would finally be remembered and their stories told. The photograph of Eleanor Hartwell has become one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the study of 19th-century serial murder. Martinez donated the image to the National Museum of Crime and Punishment, where it serves as a centerpiece in an exhibition about historical serial killers and the evolution of criminal investigation. The case has had lasting impact on how historians approach frontier crime and the study of missing persons from the territorial period. Eleanor's ability to operate undetected for months highlighted the need to re-examine other unsolved disappearances from the era with modern investigative techniques. Dr. Chen published a comprehensive book about Eleanor's crimes, titled Behind: The Gentle Smile, The Eleanor Hartwell Murders and the Dark Side of Frontier Charity. The book restored the identities and stories of Eleanor's 7 known victims, ensuring that women like Sarah Mills and Carmen Rodriguez would be remembered as individuals rather than anonymous statistics. The research also prompted the Arizona Historical Society to establish a database of missing persons from the territorial period, recognizing that many disappearances previously attributed to natural causes or Indian raids might actually represent unsolved murders. Most importantly, Eleanor's case serves as a reminder that serial murder is not a modern phenomenon, and that predators have always been skilled at exploiting social expectations and charitable institutions to access victims. Her photograph, with its deceptive portrayal of feminine respectability hiding murderous intent, continues to shock viewers more than 140 years after it was taken. The bloodstains on Eleanor's dress, initially dismissed as artifacts of old photography, have been confirmed through modern forensic analysis as genuine evidence of violence. Her cold, calculating stare, captured forever in the portrait, provides a window into the mind of a killer who felt no remorse for her crimes. Eleanor Hartwell's legacy is one of deception, violence, and the danger of assuming that evil cannot hide behind a gentle smile. Her photograph serves as a permanent reminder that the most dangerous predators are often those who appear most trustworthy, and that true justice requires looking beyond surface appearances to uncover the darkness that some people carry within them. The 7 women who died at Eleanor's hands have finally received the recognition and remembrance they deserved. Their stories preserved as warnings about the vulnerability of those seeking help and the responsibility society bears to protect its most defenseless members.